Okay, so yes, welcome everyone. This is a quick presentation on what the tool investigation and code improvement subgroup is doing. And I'll go back a bit in history, how we formed. There was a workshop 4 in May 2020, where Shua presented how you can create your own first kernel patch. So an introduction to the patch submission process and the development process that's behind the kernel development. There were some further investigations in June on Coccinelle findings. So Coccinelle is a static analysis tool that's used in the kernel development, and that was quite interesting in that we found some potential bugs, and that we basically identified what the tools can do and what kind of false positives we encounter. So in fall 2020, we kicked off the separate subgroup to focus on the application of tools and handling the tool results. To do that, we initially started with investigations on our private machines, but now we actually have a dedicated build machine that continuously builds and provides feedback. And we'll look into that in just a second. Yeah, so how is this work related to safety? In some way, right, safety standards mandate to be in control of the software development process. And of course, in the kernel community, the contributing stakeholders are in control of that process. So if you want to meet the objective of being in control, you need to be among the stakeholders contributing in order to claim that you actually have a certain control or relevant impact on the software development process. So we explore how you can actually impact the software development process in a meaningful way. So there are basically 3 steps that we are going to take. First one is that we need to enable the group members to contribute. Secondly, we need to set up infrastructure to observe the selective measures or qualities that we might be of interest for us. And then we need to interact with the community in a healthy and beneficial way. And I'll go into detail what kind of possibilities we have for those 3 steps. So step 1, there we actually already did a bit of onboarding for, let's say, kernel first committers. And we have areas of work that are interesting. So checkbacks, patch fixes for staging is a good starting point because the maintainer is well aware of it being a starting point for newcomers to learn the patch submission process. Then we have these make tools happy kernel patches. So we look into tools and we make them happy by modifying the source code. Again, need to be a bit careful on that aspect. We'll see later why. Additions to kernel documentation, explaining tools, agreed policies, and so on. So there are the possibility to provide documentation, additions to check patch or to testing. Again, here for adding more information to the check patch documentation is actually, again, here's a good ground to do so because I'm one of the maintainers of that check batch documentation, and the other one I'm in close contact with. Further, consolidating multiple descriptions within the kernel process documentation. There are multiple documents that exist or have been created over time at different decades, and they coexist at the moment. And of course, there's a chance to consolidate that. Something that's Milan in our group has actually already done the first patch on, and there is a lot of further possibilities, and it gives a good insight into how the current development process works by reviewing that documentation and consolidating it. And of course, there's a possibility of doing actual bug fix patches. Again, there we need to be careful. See later why. Yes, so the group is quite small, but we actually try to provide introduction, guidance, and consulting to newcomers on a pretty personal basis. Yes, the steps 2 is that we need kind of an infrastructure to observe some measures and qualities. And for that, we have a build server and a code checker instance. I'll quickly show a demo to that. And you can get access yourself by requesting it on the mailing list. Okay. I'll have to say. What do you see at the moment?
Your code checker 6.16.
Okay, great. Okay, so that's page. It doesn't show on my screen, but okay. Yeah, so here we have basically 2 instances or 2 configs that we're running. Well, right, one is for the AGL config. We can quickly look into that. Yes, it's the usual demo effect, timed out. Okay, so we're running a different set of tools on this config, and you can see every day we're recording the current state on Linux Next, and we have roughly 15,000 findings of those tools that are reported that deserve a deeper look on, okay, what's going on there in the code. So that's quite a lot, but AGL also has a very large config itself. Here's a def config that we're using at the moment, and they're the set of findings is a bit much less, right? Around 5,000 findings, and also there are very many false positives. So what you can actually show in this graph is we can, in this tool, we can look at the new ones that appeared. And again, this is all in work in progress. So you can see there are a number of things that are parse errors, but also you can see that here, for example, in this Intel DDIs on the Intel display drivers, there's 2 new dead stores, and you can look at those and you can see, okay, what has changed, what is the reason that what is analyzed here, and what's going on here. And again, here it seems that this tool identified that the storage of this value here is pointless because it's overwritten here, and it's never read at the end of this loop. So whatever the intent of this functionality here was, seems not to be working as expected. Again, a thing that's worth to look into and report to the developers. Yes, and that's what we can do with this tool. As you can see, from one day to the other, we actually have 102 new findings. That's the general picture we see at the moment, but there are many false positives in there. There are many parsing bugs that we first need to take care of in this tool to get to a much lower and much more relevant number that can be tracked. Quickly show another detail. Let's see. Go here. So one thing that we actually also is probably of interest to look at is for newcomers is we can look at the dead stores. That's one of the largest groups, and we can look at the core kernel. So that's the kernel subdirectory, and there we see that we have a manageable set of 22 findings that would need to be assessed. And that might be a good starting point to go through, understand the code and understand if these are false positives or true positives. So these are activities that are worth to continue in the future. Okay. Yes. So you should be able to see my slides again.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So yes, that's the quick demo on this instance. We have here's a small subset that's worth for discussion to work on. And of course, now we come to step 3, interact with the community and maintainers in a healthy and beneficial way. There's these are just 2 examples from emails that are in my mailbox from this week on things that go on static analysis or people fixing static analysis reports or fixing based on what they read from static analysis reports. Again, this has not been participants in this group, but other stakeholders, other companies that have been involved, or other people have been involved, individuals been involved. And as you can see from the feedback, if you use static analysis findings and do these fixes not carefully, you can run into situations where you destroy your reputation or just cause pain in the overall development process. And that's something that you need to be aware of and where some care needs to be taken into account. So how can we counter that of reporting these unwanted reporting and patch submission effects that we have? So we want to, first of all, guide the onboarding for newcomers. So before you send out mails to the overall mailing list, it's better to go through our channels to get initial feedback. We want to establish an own review and test process so that it's trustworthy to other maintainers, that they can rely on what this group has stated or what it identified. We want to get tooling in place to report early So even during the patch submission process. So then, yes, and only report relevant issues of those tools. And then what you can achieve with that is that you actually eliminate that trivial patch submissions are even needed, because you can just avoid them by reporting them when they are introduced in the first place. And then usually the authors would take care as part of their development activity, and not as a after the fact repair that takes again time and attention of others in that process. Okay, so these are the next steps that we had from the last workshop. I've put in bold those that we actually started with, or that we worked on. So the CI is up and running. We have this triage system. It's not the best system you could envision, but it's the best available and needs some work. And we are welcoming newcomers. Also, we started setting up and running dynamic analysis tools, so we'll get more findings over the next few months. Yeah, so quickly refined on what kind of things need to be done on this continuous and collaborative triage. We need to improve this interface, right? It reports 100 findings each day, but most of them are probably just misconceptions of what is really new and what is not. We need to exercise that triage on a small data set to understand what needs to be improved. And then we need to, at some point, decide when are we ready to reach out to a larger audience, right? So does this tracking capability work well enough? Do we have an email interface for triage as new bots, or as the newer kernel issue tracking bots have? And how do we work with managing many users and working with comments from many users? That's potentially some features that we need. And then we can actually collaborate with a larger audience on such a tool. Yes, so with that, quickly say yes, we're happy to get more people joining and assist in patch submission. We'll welcome anyone who wants to collaborate on this issue triage. And of course, the compute resources we have are available for testing anything that is of interest for you. So we would need to know, okay, which kernel files, directories, configurations, and test suites are relevant. And if we don't get any input, we'll probably just look at a small def config with some standard driver support and some standard test suites. Yes, that said, I think we're open for questions. Yeah, okay, so if there are no questions, there's, okay. Step 2. Sure. Yes, so what's the question here? Okay, yeah, so I think, right, yeah, subscribe to the development process mailing list and just ask for getting access.
I have one question, Lukas.
Yeah, sure.
do you plan to look at different types of tools, or are you still focusing on the static analysis tools at this stage?
I think so. What we started with was static analysis tools, and this kind of, so we started with static analysis tools. One of the reasons is it's easily accessible for newcomers. Of course, it comes with the challenge of having many false positives, especially because these some of the tools are used for many years already, and every bug has been probably looked at, although we don't have the evidence of that, right? Or every report has ever been looked at. The next step would be then running dynamic analysis tools. The challenge there is that we'll get real bug reports on how to crash the kernel. But these bug reports from especially the syscaller fuzzer, it drives the kernel into very special states, some which are completely unreasonable to even assume that they would appear in a real system. But to understand them, that's quite tricky. So that's going to be, I think, the next challenge that we're going to face. And that would be, I think, the alternative. Of course, always the question is, what is static analysis? You could also say, well, running a spell checker on the kernel and finding all the spelling mistakes is static analysis. That would be, I think, a quality as well. The question is, of course, if somebody in the group wants to follow up on such an activity. I don't know if Colin is part of the audience, but right, Colin King does that as part of his, I think, keeping busy while waiting compiling activities. But there are many others that are looking at very specific minor qualities as well that might be integrated into our activities here as well. But yeah, we're up for any kind of aspect that might be of interest.
So I did wonder, sort of tools have been mentioned by some of the other working groups as well, such as tools for tracing particular paths through the kernel, and some of the tools that have been used as part of the process that Gab's been describing. I just wonder whether actually looking at those tools from a tools perspective might be interesting.
Yeah, it might be interesting. I'm still wondering, and that hasn't been answered yet. What is the property that you would really want to check, right? I mean, you can, of course, mine for information, but of course, what are you going to check, right? Are you going to check for architectural violations? And how are you going to react upon those? Mm-hmm. So that would need to first be explained by those groups that have developed those tools. I think that's the main challenge, right? These tools currently exist without an explanation what you would need to observe during the development process.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I mentioned it, maybe actually kind of focusing on defining what the purpose of these tools are, and exactly what we hope to find with them might help to kind of make clear how they're being used in the specific cases. But I'm not sure whether that fits with this group, which is largely about how to use them, or how to kind of make effective use of them, or development process, which is saying, why are we using them? What do we help to show by them? But it feels like something, if particularly if ELISA is going to then be actually making these tools available and making recommendations about using them, then this kind of analysis might be useful.
I completely agree. Yeah, but we need to go kind of one step at a time, right? We are already we're already facing problems, or let's say problems, we're identifying chances of improvement, right, with what we already have at the moment, and we're working on that. So improving the existing tooling we have, such that we get precise information that we can act on. I think the discussion in the chat actually also shows, right, some of the tools are pointing out syntactic matters that aren't that relevant anymore, or that have now changed its severity. And understanding all these aspects, I think one of the critical points here. Yes. So yes, you're welcome to join and have a look for yourself. And yes, it's going to be a longer activity, but we're doing one step by a time.
Lucas, there's one more question in the chat. Is there a plan to make the sub working group into a standalone working group?
I think that's a valuable thing to do. By now we have, I think, an understanding of an activity that stands by itself, and that's worth to make it a working group. Potentially even move the working group into, right, once we want to reach out to more people outside of the ELISA project, we'll have much more interaction with the kernel community than with maybe with the other working groups within ELISA. But for that, we first need to get our things straightened out and show that we have something that's valuable and minimal viable. Yep. Okay, any last questions? Okay, so then, yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the discussion. And yeah, we'll be happy if we see you around in the development process mailing list. And you can reach out to us and check for yourself what we have. Okay, there was one question. Do you know the percentage of false positives? Very quickly, for the dead stores, I think it was only false positive was only 50%. For many of the other rules, it's much higher. For some, I think it was closer to 99%. Again, but that's there's a challenge already by itself, the definition of a false positive. Because again, gave a presentation last year at Plumbers that the definition of a false positive is already a challenge. And depending on how you define it, that rate changes. Alessandro, I hope that answers your question. Okay. Yeah, and thanks for your time.